Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Effective Living. I'm Coach Ricardo Miller, and this morning we're joined with my good friend and brother, Reverend Sedaric Dinkens. It is such a delight to have you back here on Effective Living. How are you doing this morning, my brother?
Man, I'm excited. I'm great. I'm happy that I'm here to be with you this morning.
Hey, listen, man. So much is happening in our world today, and you've been a lifelong student of the Word of God, and I'm so excited about this talk because lately I've been feeling the need to have what I call generational principles, teachings, things that ought to be passed down and looked at and really
Mhm.
be held or hold on to at a high level in these ever-changing times. Before we go into that, Dinkins, tell our viewing audience a little bit about yourself.
Man, I am a 40-year minister.
Yeah.
I started in when did I start? I started in March 1981.
Wow.
And I know I don't look at y'all. Thank you. I appreciate that. But man, I've been doing this 40 years, man. Married for 25 years this year. 25, 26 years. I never forget that. But I can't remember the exact year. I think it's 26 years this year. And man, been pastor for most of that time. Coach preachers for the last 15, 20 years. Father, two children, two grandchildren. Man, listen, that's me, country boy at the
That's
heart.
good. Say country boy, the real deal.
Country boy. Yeah, I'm the real deal, man. Yeah.
Can you cook? The question is, can you cook?
Okay. Now here's the funny thing. I can cook some stuff. Now the stuff that I can cook, I can cook.
Yeah.
In fact, I make the best. Listen, I make the best smothered chicken and spaghetti you ever want to taste in your life. I promise you.
Okay.
Let's not go beyond that. Let's not do that.
Hey man, listen. You've been preaching for a while, as you mentioned. You were a boy preacher,
Yeah.
and preaching has changed. Talk
Yeah.
about some of that for a minute. I mean, obviously there was a time when you saw, oh my goodness, when you initially started, maybe there was this common practice, and then you went into you maybe late teens, early 20s around ministry, and then you were in your late 20s, early 30s, and then you kept seeing your life grew and the world changed. What was preaching like?
Oh man. Let me go at this two different ways, if I might. First of all, let me approach it by saying, in the history of preaching, and I would encourage any preacher that's out there to. There's a book called The History of Preaching. I would encourage them to get that book because preaching itself changed over the years.
Yeah.
Like literally, there was a time with Aristotle and some of those other persons who were philosophers, but also preachers, that rhetoric was important. It was basically a dialectical lecture type of style. Like it was all about carefully placed words. When I then of course with the African American tradition, it started out with more of a rhythmic musical type of presentation. People don't even understand when they talk about hooping that they did that not because that was what they thought they needed to do. They did that because that was what they had to do.
Wow.
In order for the slave masters, etc., not to catch on to the fact that they were educating these slaves.
Wow.
They sang because that's what the slaves did all the time. So just in my personal experience, man, when I started preaching 40 years ago, man, every black preacher, first of all, my context come out of the black church.
Yes.
And so everybody hooped. That's what they did. Now, for those who are listening to us and don't know what hooping is, that's when the preacher changes his voice and begins to do that stuff. Man, let me explain something to y'all. That's what we did. It was more narrative preaching. We told a story. So we used colorful language. For example, we would say stuff like, he died. Didn't he die? He died until the sun refused to shine, died until the moon turned red as blood, died until the earth began to reel and rock like a drunken man. We use that kind of language because it captured the imagination of people. I've noticed, however, that as time has progressed along and people, particularly of color, have become more educated, they don't tend to be as impressed with that particular style of preaching. They look for what we call more substance. They want to hear more argument. And so we've had to learn to be more articulate and learn to be more didactic in our presentation. And so I've watched preaching change to where even and again, my context is the black church, although I preach to everybody, let's be clear, but that's where I grew up. And I'll say this and I'll stop, Coach Miller. The thing that we have to understand is I'm learning too that preaching has become more about what is presented rather than how it is presented.
Okay. Wow. What is presented rather than how it's presented. I want to talk about that, but in addition, I want to also talk about the fact that you talk about the African American style or way
Right.
of preaching, and that probably our talk for the most part will be centered around that particular way. But there is a way you introduced that there was a reason for that way, but now that way is evolving. Before we go on, let's go back there just for a moment, because there are a lot of people who don't understand, and you shared it really in a phenomenal way just now, that I didn't even know that's the reason why hooping emerged, and that when I now know too that the truth is when they started to, some would say, play with words, that
Yes.
they knew that the words had the potential to bring their audience to the message and take them where they were trying to go. The African American model of preaching over the years. Talk a little bit more about that.
Oh man, first of all, because dude, you know, when you say that, first thing I'm gonna think of is some books.
Yeah.
There's a book by Frank Thomas called the African American. Why did I just forget the name of the book? But I've got it in my Kindle. So that ain't no big deal. I'll get it in just a minute. There's one called Black Preaching by Henry Mitchell. There's a book called The Hum. There is a book by Frank Thomas called They Like to Never Quit Praising God. You can read up a little bit on this particular style and approach of preaching by just simply availing ourselves of that particular those resources that are out there. Now, having said that, it is important for us to understand, first and foremost, black preaching, as it is typically called, is not hooping. That's important for us to understand. That Ricardo Miller, who I've never heard stand in a pulpit and change his voice, never, is as much a black preacher as T.D. Jakes, who is going to sweat and holler and dance all across the stage. Marcus Cosby and Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church is as much a part of the black preaching tradition as Howard John Wesley or a Van Wesley Holmes Jr. It is what makes us black preachers, according to theologian James Cone. I don't mean to do too much here, but theologian James Cone says that what makes us black is not the color of our skin, but the content of our message. That there tends to be more of a message of liberation, a message that says God wants justice for all people. And that is a message that, quite frankly, not only persons of color skin-wise can preach, but also people who may not be that, but are interested in what interests God. I hope I didn't just lose connection.
I think we blacked out. Yeah, I think we lost connection just for a minute. But
Lord God,
how are you doing? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, sir. Yes, sir. I was about to bind the devil.
All right. No, that was I know, right? When it comes to preaching, man, now we're talking generational principles that should be passed on. In your opinion, man, the 7 rules of engagement. What would that be? I mean, Hans, hey, these are off the cuff Dinkens, man. If you're going to deliver, if you're going to be the one with the mic to present the message, what would you spit out to that person watching us today, reminding them, let me tell you something, make sure you got these 7 things on point?
Okay. All right. First and foremost, I think these principles go beyond what we do in the pulpit.
Okay. Yep.
I think that I'm more concerned with the totality of the preacher than just just what the preacher presents.
Yep.
We have had too many preachers, in my opinion, who have preached great messages and then lived raggedy lives. Don't leave a legacy or whatever. In fact, and then I'm gonna give them to you. I'm gonna list them for you. Elder Samuel McDonald, the Pathway of Life Church, said that we oftentimes work on the gift and forget the grace. And so, and that's important.
Yep.
So what I'm going to say right now is part about the pulpit, but understanding that life is a pulpit.
Yes.
Life is a pulpit. So here's number one. When it comes to preaching and generational, that transcends generations, I guess, principles. Number one, the text does not change.
Wow. Yep.
The text does not change. I'm gonna try not to unpack all of these, but this one I must talk about, because ladies and gentlemen, there's some of us out there that are trying to be revelational. Yep. Listen to me. There's a word in preaching in the academy called exegesis. Exegesis literally is just a word that simply means to take what's there and extract the truth from it. So I pull the principle of the truth from the text. And I'm hearing this word bantered about called revelation, where the text says this, but now we try to connect this so that we can come up with something that no. If this text says this, the text says what it says, and the truth of the text doesn't change. So let's, and by the way, that's different from interpretation.
Right. Yes.
Okay. My interpretation of that tie may be that it's a blue tie with white stripes. Somebody else may interpret it that it's a white tie with blue stripes. Okay. However you want to do that, you can interpret it different. What you can't change is that it's a tie.
Yeah.
All right. That's number one. That's number one. The text does not change. Number two, audience response, or whether it be especially verbal response, is not the central focus. Yeah. That's not the central focus. So you don't preach for response. Again, I want to call on Elder Samuel McDonald again. Please forgive me for calling on the elder again. But Elder Samuel McDonald said this to us at the Ministers Roundtable at Pathway. He said there's a difference between preaching to make people shout and people shouting because you're preaching.
Yeah. Wow.
So number one, the text doesn't change. Number two, the audience response is not the central focus, man. Sometimes people just ain't gonna say nothing, but they gonna walk out changed.
Yeah.
And that's what you want. Number three, and this is important. Yep. Reading and knowledge is essential.
Yep.
Dr. Gardner Taylor said the difference between a good preacher and a great preacher is the library. Yep. You know what, Miller? I asked to talk to a preacher one time, and if I would call his name, you would know him. And he said, if I call his name, you would know him. And I'm not going to. You know, I'm bold enough to, but I won't today. But Miller, he actually said to me, I asked him one time, I said, man, what book can I recommend to preachers? And his response to me was, I don't read. And I told him, you should have preached your last sermon already. You should never preach again. Wow. And I love him. But the reality is reading and knowledge is essential. How are we going to take people where we have not been? Number four, listen to me carefully. Uniqueness is the source of power.
Wow. Uniqueness.
Be uniquely you. Number five, being alone is a formula for ineffectiveness.
Wow.
Listen, this is important. You will not preach as effective as you can if you are all by yourself. Jesus preached, but remember, he had 12 disciples, and then he reduced that down to 3 that was in his inner circle. God has not called you to be alone. In fact, the Bible says it is not good for that human to be alone. Being alone is a formula for ineffective. Number 6. I think I'm going number 6.
You're doing well.
Spiritual growth is more important than a well-developed preaching gift.
Wow.
Man and woman of God, listen to me. If you're out there hearing me now or later, this is important. Yep. Do not preach and get everybody else saved, and then you yourself remain unsaved. Paul says it this way. He said, I don't want to run the race and then myself be disqualified. I knew of a preacher who pastored my home church, the Country Missionary Baptist Church, 1602 Rose Street, Texarkana, Arkansas, that literally named Pastor King. It is said that when he was on his deathbed, his confession was, I preached and helped others to get saved, and I myself am not saved. Wow. You and I must know the God about whom we're preaching. If the text does not live in us, then the words coming out our mouths are good, and they can be effective because it's God's word. Yep. But it's empty because it's not affecting us. Man, listen, the truth has to hit me first. Yep. And it's important for me to be a disciple. I'll stop talking about that. Here's the last thing I want to say as a generation person. I think I'm on number 7. Yep. Remember this. We influence the next generation. Wow. Here's the deal. Just like I learned from somebody, somebody needs to be learning from me. I need to be an example of what excellence in preaching and living is, so that that young preacher who's coming after me will look at me now and say, you know what? I need to follow that example so that I can be an effective preacher.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it right there. The Reverend Dr. I would say Dr. Sedaric Dinkens, man. And you did mention to me he received an honorary doctorate degree, so we ain't messing with him. But listen, Reverend Dinkens, man, I know you could do a class on each one of those.
Man, I think that you know what? I've learned something, Miller. I used to just work on my gift.
Yeah.
I did. I used to just work on my gift. And I thank God for Pastor Danny Wegman. Two preachers I actually thank God for is Pastor Sedaric L, who was at the Highland Hills United Methodist Church at that time, and Pastor Danny Wegman. Those two preachers forced me to work on something other than my gift because they weren't impressed with my gift.
Yeah.
They both said, oh, man, you can preach. But they were more concerned with integrity. Yeah. And they were more concerned with character. And they wanted to make sure that when I stand up to preach, I was not just declaring some empty rhetoric that was going to impress people, but then not impress God. And that's important, man. So I'm concerned at this point about something that's going to live beyond me.
Yeah. Dinkens, with that said, with all that is changing, and we live in a society where everybody wants the new, right? They want the new, to the point where you started to mention it about pushing the text to a place where the text should not have even been attempted to go. Yes, blue, yes, white, it's still a tie. Don't mess with the dynamic, it's a tie. When it comes to those type of truths, Dinkens, let's talk a little bit more about those from the what you believe, again, with the test of time. Some may wear skinny jeans, some may still wear a suit or a three-piece suit. At the end of the day, that's methods, but the principles. Is there let's talk about some more principles necessary for sustaining this eternal message that we all should continue to keep? Anything else you want to highlight there?
Man, let me tell you what I think is important to preaching. Oh my God, this is a good question.
Yeah.
This is a good question. I think what's most essential to preaching is found in Acts chapter 2. Allow me to try to unpack it very quickly.
Yeah.
The Bible says on the day of Pentecost, they were all in one place, and suddenly there was a sound from heaven like a rushing mighty wind, filled the house where they were sitting, and everybody was filled with the Holy Ghost. Now check this out. And they began to speak in other tongues. Now hold on. For all the charismatic community that's out there, they're saying, oh yeah, see, he believed they need to speak in tongues. No. God gave them the ability to communicate with those to whom they were getting ready to communicate. That literally verse 11 of Acts chapter 2 says, and that the people began to say, how is it that we hear the wonderful works of God declared in our own language, which says this, an essential principle is this: communication and relating is more important. So I had a friend of mine. He was an illustrative preacher. He was an illustrative preacher. Literally, like he would walk in with a stick, and he'd have a text, and he'd talk about this stick as related to this text. Now he was going to be very exegetically sound. He was going to be hermeneutically astute. He was going to make sure that he was preaching the text. In other words, but he was going to preach it in such a way that people would be looking at this stick, learning about this text. But that was the congregation to which he preached. And so it's important for us to understand, it doesn't matter if I stand up and everybody's like, wow, that was a good message. If they walk out and they cannot say what I said, I failed as a preacher. That's important, man.
Wow. Dinkens, popularity is big today, where some guys, they may not have the numbers, but they're producing the fruits that's going to remain. And some may have the numbers, but the truth is, the testing of time will reveal that they weren't producing fruits. They were producing crowds, but crowds is not necessarily fruit. When it comes to the kingdom, how important is it for us to make sure that we keep the main thing as what you just eloquently stated, to make sure lives are being impacted, even if it's one life or 10,000 lives? At the end of the day, discipleship and molding a message of hope that is built around transformation rather than entertainment.
First of all, Ricardo Miller, you may be the best person that I've ever sat with to do an interview. Your questions are on point, bro. Listen to me. I'm telling you, man, this is good stuff. Dr. Zanwich Holmes Jr. said something one time while he was pastor at St. Louis Community United Methodist Church. He said, there's a difference between swelling and growing. And we have to remember that one is healthy and the other is not. One is sustainable and the other is not. Here's what I would like for us to understand, and I want to illustrate it like this. I don't know, and I probably guess I could go look it up, the pastor who was responsible for Billy Graham getting saved. I don't know his name. That person's name does not ring throughout history, but Billy Graham's does. Watch this. His legacy, that pastor's legacy is, I impacted Billy Graham. See, here's what we don't understand. One little small seed has the potential to produce a great harvest. We think that it's in the number of seeds. No. The Bible says that some of those seeds are gonna fall by the wayside, and some of them are gonna be scorched, and some of them are just gonna die. The question is, how effective have I been to make sure that I have this group of disciples that have grown up to be mature disciples of Jesus Christ that are becoming effective? Okay, let me illustrate. It just hit me how to illustrate. It just hit me how to illustrate this. I used to be in an organization called Amway. I don't know if the people out there remember Amway, but at one point Amway was popular, man. And I never will forget when they taught us how to go about building that business. Now, I never made any money in Amway, but they taught me a principle. Here's what they said. They said, you want to go out and duplicate yourself so that the person that you teach and train can not only be as good as you, watch, but become greater than you.
Wow.
Yep. And that is the central preach. Listen, preacher, it's not about how big was your or influential was your platform, but how many people are you putting out there that made it to the stage? I learned this now, Miller. I used to worry about, will I preach for this person or preach for that person? I have not preached for them, but I got people that I've trained that have. I got people that I poured into, and they're getting those stages. And I sat back and I had to reevaluate and say, wow, what a legacy of ministry God has allowed in my life, because I'm producing somebody that is producing in the name of our God.
That is so good. That's so good. Dinkens, I've noticed in my travel, even during COVID, that there are still major metropolitan areas that have a lot of church structures, but the number of people in those church structures are decreasing and decreasing rapidly. Is it the message or is it the method? What is holding them back from bringing people into those possible walls when the community itself is growing, but the congregation isn't?
Okay. First and foremost, we blame the pandemic for the emptying out of the church, and the pandemic was not the reason. We have to stop and become truthful. We have to stop and become evaluators. We have to do some real analysis. Let me put it this way. We have to take it out the spirit realm sometime and just simply bring it down and say, let's look at this for what it is. Here's the truth. Before the pandemic, less than 20% of the people in America attended church. That's before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, of that generation of persons that are my son's age up to about 35 or something like that, well, actually from like 8 up to like 25 or 35, that generation of persons, about 8% of them or less even believe that Christianity is a valid way of approaching faith. So we have to understand that this has not been a problem that the pandemic created. This is a problem that was beginning to happen before the pandemic. It's kind of the frog in the kettle example, where if you take a frog and throw it into to boiling water, he'll jump out. But if you put him in there in cool water and let it heat up a little bit at a time, he'll cook to death because he doesn't realize that he's dying. So what do I think is the central problem? Here it is. We have not been focused on what we need to be focused on. And the focus has to be, how do we reach people? How do we connect to people? We've become great preachers, watch this, to the people that like preaching. but we have not become great evangelists to reach those people who don't care anything about us. Remember, Jesus never went into the synagogue to preach. Go look at the Bible. He wasn't preaching in the synagogue. He was preaching in the temple. He went in there because that was their custom, and that's what the Jews did.
Right.
But where he did his preaching was where people would go out and gather. And here's what I will say finally, and I hope I answered this question effectively.
You're doing great.
Lord.
Yeah.
But I will tell us this. The question of our preaching is, do the people out there that need to hear the message the most come to hear us? That's the question. I'm serious. When I was pastoring in Mount Pleasant, Texas, I learned this lesson. When drug dealers were coming to our church, when prostitutes, there was a woman, God help me, I'm telling the truth. There was a woman one morning before I got ready to preach. I was getting ready to preach. She stood up, she said, I need to testify. Scared me to death. I said, Lord, what is this woman about to say? Because you could tell she wasn't no church girl. And so I was like, what's she finna say? She said, I want you to know that I just turned, these are her exact words, I turned my last trick before I came to this church. She said, but I came to this church, watch this, because I knew y'all would not judge me. Y'all lean into the camera because I need you to hear me. She said, I came here because I knew this church would accept me. And so I'm asking the churches, how are we doing in regard to relating to the people, to make them know, to help them know that you are loved unconditionally, and even though we will have a standard and we will have accountability, we're not trying to change you. What we're trying to do is give you the message and let God change you.
Wow. We're trying to give you the message and let God change you. Pastor Dinkens, in our churches, we have people showing up. The question is, are we scholastically educating them to a point that allows them to be able to go back into the uttermost parts of the earth and be kingdom representatives? How important is it for the pastor, the minister, the leadership of a church to properly equip its membership to be salt in the earth?
Oh man, that's good. The church is all about discipleship. Jesus did not tell us to go out there and build buildings. He did tell us to go out there and make disciples. And so we should have, how did Paul say it? No, Peter said, but grow in grace and in the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So our responsibility as a pastor, especially, is to equip people to make steps, to grow, to go. You're a coach. When you come in, and I imagine when you come in and you begin to work with somebody, you evaluate their current level, and then you put together a process, a plan. How do we get you from this step to this next step? How do we get you from this level to this next level? So I think that what pastors need to do, in my opinion, is not just have Bible studies, but discipleship training avenues, which would mean, if we got, let's say we have some intellectuals over there, let's say we got some PhDs in our church. Well, these are the intellectuals, these are the thinkers. So why not find some books that will help them and put them in a course of study that they will be able to sit around and articulately talk, what do I want to say? Articulately talk about these particular concepts that will stimulate their mind, because that's how they learn. But then we may have, but I might have grandmama over there who can't even read. And we might need to take something like practical cooking and grandma principles, or whatever we want to call it. I'm not articulating that well, but we want to walk them through, because there has to be ways for us to be able to help people to grow level by level and faith by faith. And let me say one final thing, and celebrate people where they are rather than condemn them.
Wow.
That's a critical principle.
This is so good. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm joined with Reverend Dr. Sedaric Dinkens, and we're talking generational principles when it comes to preaching. Cedric, the years ago, 70s, 80s, 90s, I think they were the more dominant years. Bible college, seminaries, higher learning institution push preaching, pastoring, evangelism, the development of your gifts from a continual education institution beyond high school. Back then, they were supported a lot by churches. Churches today aren't encouraging their members to go to Bible college. What's the ramification of that, in your opinion?
Ignorance. That's the ramification of it. That's the problem. We have people out there who are preaching without the foundation of knowledge. And I want to be clear about this. I hope I'm very clear about this, and I want to say this as humbly as I possibly can, because I ask God, keep me from the sin of arrogance, because arrogance stinks in God's sight.
Yep.
If you want God to stop using you, let your head get big.
Yep.
So here's what I want to say though. God has blessed me. I went to seminary the first time when I was 14 years old. The first time I took classes at that higher level, I was 14 years old in Texarkana at a little satellite school under Dr. S.A. Stuckey, Dr. Ulysses at Forte, etc. I went on to get a bachelor's degree from Jarvis Christian College. I have a master's of divinity from Perkins School of Theology. I have an honorary doctorate from Sacramento Theological Seminary. I'm graduating. I will be finished with my earned doctorate, bless his name, in December of this year. I believe in education, but I want to say something to every preacher out there. A preacher said to me one time, said, Reverend, I didn't have the chance to go to school like you. I didn't get a chance to go sit in the classroom. And I asked them a question, can you read?
Yep.
Because here's my question. Education is not a matter of sitting in the classroom. Yep. Education is a matter of availing yourself to the information. Yep. And then once you get the information, learning to use it. Yep. Because I know a whole bunch of people who can quote. But when I listen to them, I'm like, oh, that's empty. Because we don't know how to apply it. So educate yourself. So since we're talking preaching, let me say this. So if you're a preacher out there, there's a book called The 12 Essential Skills of a Great Preacher, The 12 Essential Skills of Great Preaching. Man, you got to read that book. There's a book out there called Power in the Pulpit by Cleophas LaRue. You need to read that book. There's a book out there called An Essential Guide to Preaching by Ronald Allen. You need to read that book. There's a book out there by Thomas Long called The Witness of Preaching. You need to read that book. Biblical Preaching by Hayden Robertson. Now, hold on. Somebody said, wait a minute, Reverend, you keep throwing out books. Yeah, because if you go in there right now on my shelf in my kitchen, dude, I've got 100 books on preaching up there that I've read. Yeah. So when people say you can preach, it's not because God gifted me, watch, alone. It is also because I took the gift and now I use the resources out there to shape that gift. Yep. And that's essentially important.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you guys, you need to share this live with someone who has ministry in their heart, who has an interest for the pulpit, who has the gift of God and has been calling themselves a preacher. Just go ahead and tell them, listen, Sedaric Dinkens is clarifying some stuff that we all should know and embrace and accept at the very core. Pastor Dinkens, when you look at the future of preaching and how people are moving forward in ministry, what are some of the things you see? What does the future look like for you, having seen what you've seen already and possibly looking into the future? What do you see coming?
Man, that is such a good question. You know, number one, I think things have changed, especially with the pandemic. We had to learn to preach to a camera. Yeah. And let me tell you what that did to us. It forced those of us who thought we were preaching well because people were shouting at us, yeah, to go back and reevaluate what we were saying, because all of a sudden all we could hear with ourselves, and here's what we thought. This is probably not the best way to say it. Ooh, that's not good. I actually was going to say that sucks, but that probably is not the best way to say it. But man, so I think what's going to happen and going forward is people are going to listen more effectively. And I think they're going to listen more intently. So I think that what's going to happen is it's going to be important for us to make sure that our message is sound. Make sure that we know what we're talking about. Yes, indeed, the Spirit of the living God will give you what to say, but it is not the Spirit's responsibility to create your sermon. That is your job. The Spirit of God gives inspiration, but it is up to us to study to show ourselves approved. So I think that's going to be critical going forward. Here's the other thing. I think that we're going to have to make sure that our message extends explicitly beyond the central place of the pulpit that we're used to preaching in. There is a possibility that we may never have that central audience in the building again like we've had in the past. That's very possible. So we must, this medium like this, this medium like this is going to be really important. It's going to be really important because we must create, Miller, I'm so proud of what you're doing. We must create avenues to pass the message along that doesn't look like what it's always looked like. And that's going to be real important. So I want to tell some young preachers out there that's looking for ways to preach. There's a young man, and I highly recommend it, named Justin Wade. Justin Wade is a senior student at Livingston College on the East Coast. Justin Wade, during the pandemic, did something that I thought was incredible. He stopped waiting for pastors to give him a pulpit, and he decided that let me take my computer and turn it into a pulpit. So he now does Bible studies. He now does, once a week, he does a time of preaching where he comes on, and he has a major audience now, Miller, that's following him because he has decided, I'm going to use the mediums that are out there. Things have changed. They're going to continue to change. Last thing I'll say about it, be ready to evolve and be ready to change.
Wow.
If you stay stuck where you were, then you will never get to where you can be. Let me say it again. If you stay stuck where you were or where you are, you will never get to where you can be. And you have to remember this. The sons of Issachar knew the time, and they knew what to do about it. So we must do the same.
Most certainly we must. Most certainly. This has been an incredible interview with Reverend Sedaric Dinkens, ladies and gentlemen. This morning, Dinkens, before we leave, the question for you that I have for a man who has had multiple decades of preaching and ministry, effective living. What does it look like for you when you describe that as a term for a preacher? Effective living.
You know what, man? I'm gonna tell you exactly what I think it is. I'm learning now to live a balanced life. To live a balanced life. For most of my life, and I'm probably gonna be a little more transparent here than I probably should be in this medium, but then that's my nature. I'm kind of open book. Miller, I started preaching when I was 10, and I remember wanting to go to the dance because I was a young kid. I wanted to go dance with everybody else, but because I was a preacher, I didn't think I should. In fact, I was convinced I should because people said, "Oh no, you're a preacher." I remember walking into a dance one time, 8th grade, walked in there, and everybody stopped dancing just to look at me, and I got so uncomfortable that I left. And now I realize I should have stayed. In fact, I should have got out in the middle of the floor and started breakdancing because that's what we were doing back then. I should have got out there and went on and did my thing. Why? Because, ladies and gentlemen, you are a preacher, but that's only one part of who you are. So I remember, I say one thing about this, because this is important, man. This may be the most important question that you asked all this morning. I remember at our wedding, Denise, how long we've been married? 26 years? 26 years this year? Is 26 this year? 25? 27? 28 years. Okay. I'm feeling miserably. But 28 years this year. And I remember at our wedding reception, they played the song. We supposed to dance to Addicted Love. First of all, we really should have danced to something like Celebrate. I mean, we should have got it in. Yeah. I couldn't do that. I had to find something gospelish.
Come on.
Yeah. Because I'm the man of God, you know. Yeah. You know, the man of God. That's the way, when you say, you say man.
Yeah, the man of God.
Yeah, the man of God. And so I couldn't even dance with my wife at our wedding reception because I was so concerned about what people might think. Listen, I'm talking a long time about this, and I know our time is going out, but listen to me. Woman of God, man of God, listen to me carefully. God made you human. And because God made you human, God expects for you to be the best human you can be. Stop being a preacher all the doggone time.
Yeah.
Stop. You can't even sit around and play cards with your family because you're worried about what the rest of these people are going to say. No, go get you some dominoes and slap them on the table. I know there are going to be some things going to say, no, preacher, hold on. If you drink wine, get you some wine. The Bible does not say, that's okay. You can take the video down later. The Bible does not say don't do it. In fact, Ecclesiastes chapter 8 said the best thing you can do is enjoy your life. Eat, drink, and be merry. And I want to say this, that effective living means I need to make sure that my money is right for my family so that when I'm gone, that they're not struggling. Effectively, I know I talked too long, Miller.
You're doing fine, brother. You're doing fine.
To me, man. Effective living means that I have raised my kids and been a part of their lives, that I'm a good husband to my wife. I need to make sure that I'm a good pastor to my members. But if I'm great to them, but I'm no good to my family, then I have not been effective. I've failed in this sense. So I want us to be balanced. I want us to be well-rounded. I'll stop. I'll just stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sedaric Dinkens is on fire. This man is on fire. Man, I appreciate you, man. This has been a great talk this morning. And I just wanted to document this because I believe not only today, but in weeks and months to come, persons will be able to go back and listen in, because what you said is eternal truth. These are not fads, what we were suggesting. This whole conversation was not centered around a style for today. The principles shared by you today are eternal principles, man. They're lifelong, that will be able to be passed on to generation. And so thank you so much for giving us some of your time on this beautiful Thursday morning. I'm going to go ahead and treat myself and listen to the rerun. If you're watching this, guys, make sure you share, and invite somebody to watch this on our YouTube channel. If this is your first time here, subscribe to our channel. Go ahead and put on that notification bell and stay connected, because here on Effective Living, our goal is to help you to get better in every area of your life. Sedaric Dinkens, any closing thoughts that you have before we shut our talk off this morning?
I do want to just say one thing. If people would like to connect with me, please call me at 430-201-4556. That's our ministry line, and we'll have somebody to get back with you. 430-201-4556. And then if you want to email me, you can email me at preacherchat20@gmail.com. preacherchat20@gmail.com. I want to just say one final thing, and that is that I have an event coming up in June. I want to invite everybody to come to it. You can go to Eventbrite and register for this. Just type in Preacher Chat and you'll see it. But I'm doing a session, a coaching session in June 21st and June 22nd. I'm only charging $20 for this. I'm only charging $20, and you get in for both days. It's called She is a Preacher.
Wow.
She is a Preacher. I want to empower women in ministry, and I want to help those men who are still on the fence. I want to help us to understand that God demonstrates God's power through womanhood. And I want to encourage you to go ahead and register that. And you can go to my Facebook page, Sedaric Dinkens, at Sedaric Dinkens, and you can find at S Dinkens, and you can find that flyer posted there as well.
Good stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, connect with him today. Good information. He's always doing these coaching sessions, live sessions. He's available to come and talk to your team or to help you take your gift, your calling, your act of service to humanity to the next level. So don't be afraid to connect with Reverend Sedaric Dinkens today. Listen, guys, here on Effective Living, our goal is to help you to win. We want to help you to grow. We want to help you to get better. If you're enjoying the content, once again, subscribe to the channel. Dinkens, thank you very much. Have a great day. Guys, love and appreciate you all. Bye-bye.